Now I will pass the word to Jean-Michel. Jean-Michel has been the coordinator of the Bon in a Box project for the last 3 years. He works at the University of McGill at the QCBS and is a software engineer. Thank you, Jean-Michel.
Gracias, Maria. Very happy to be here. Today I'll be presenting a quick introduction along with Jory, who's a biodiversity data scientist working with us at the GEO BON Secretariat for now 3 months. She's working with collaborators to help integrate the analysis pipeline in the Bon in a Box platform. The second part of the presentation will be from the genetic diversity indicator. Sean Hoban will be presenting. He's a senior scientist in the tree conservation biology at the Morton Arboretum, a botanical garden and research institute near Chicago in the United States. He leads a team whose goal is to create the tools and knowledge to support the tree conservation and restoration, focusing on species resilience and adaptation. The next part of the presentation will be from Colombia's very own Humboldt Institute with Lina Maria Sanchez Clavijo. She's principal researcher of the Scientist Information Office at Instituto Humboldt. And then the last part of the presentation will be in French. La dernière partie sera en français with Aboubakar Samoura. He comes from the Guinean Republic. He's engineer of water and forest, specialist in the management of protected areas, and general director of Office Guinéen des Parcs Nationaux et Réserves de Faune. He represents the focal point of Guinea. And we are establishing, during this very COP, we are establishing a partnership with Guinea. Oops, just presenter names. I think we can be very proud of the monitoring framework. The monitoring framework, as we see, and it could continue much lower, is a very complex ecosystem, but we have all agreed onto monitoring with a standardized set of indicators. And this is something really important, but it comes with loads of challenges. And we believe that the only way to work through these challenges is by working together from all parts of the world. The tool we'll present today, Bon in a Box, is exactly meant for that, to work together to lower the barrier for all parties to report on the global biodiversity framework. So let's see first a few of these challenges.
So one of these challenges with implementing the global biodiversity framework is the sheer amount of data that's coming in all the time, from satellites, from citizen science databases, and from individual monitoring projects. And this is from GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And as you can see, there's over 3 billion species occurrences in that database. And it's hard to know how to actually collate all of this data into useful information that can be used to guide policy. But at the same time, there's a monumental lack of data in most of the world. There are huge gaps in taxonomy, in space, and in time. So this is also from the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. As you can see, Europe is completely lit up with species occurrences, whereas Africa and much of the Middle East has almost none.
But even if we had all the data, how do we exactly calculate this? There are indicators for which we already know how to calculate them. Others, it's not so clear. But even for the ones we know, the knowledge is spread across the world behind barriers of language, behind political barriers, or intellectual property rights that prevent the free access to it. So the result is that every party needs to kind of reinvent the wheel on their own or through their agencies, and this all happens in parallel. It's a huge waste of time and efforts. Plus, it increases the inequalities where countries with a lot of means can actually achieve the goal of reporting, while countries that have less means, they're left there on their own.
And even if you have all of the data that you need and all of the calculations that you need to actually calculate these indicators, there's still this gap between science and policy. Scientists are trying to summarize all of these complex systems. They're coming up with complex models. There's tons of data. There's complex results. Whereas policymakers want simple, actionable insights that they can use to guide policy and meet the targets of the GBF. So there's a need for all of these challenges, this data overload, this fragmented collaboration, constraints in time and resources, complex code, and this disconnect between scientists and policy can make actually implementing this monitoring framework incredibly difficult. And so there's a need for a harmonized tool that can make this easier for everyone. And this needs to be collaborative, it needs to be open access, and it needs to help everyone work together to implement this monitoring framework and meet the targets of the GBF.
So why not add this tool to the existing Bon in a box we already had, right? Maria Cecilia told you how we had this toolbox to help biodiversity observation networks make their life easier, searching for projects, searching for tools. So we decided that to help the countries with our mission at GeoBon, our long-standing mission of bringing science into action, of bringing science into making a difference in the world, that we could add this platform for all those who know how to model and to calculate the indicators, to share it with others, and to allow those who need to use it to have a much more easy experience with open access to these indicator workflows. So in order to have a global biodiversity information system, I think we need such a tool.
And one of the ways that Bon in a Box can overcome all of these challenges that we talked about, specifically the data challenge, is that it pulls data from all of these public repositories, GBIF, IUCN, the EBV data portal, and cloud-optimized geospatial formats and stat catalogs to process this data and calculate it into indicators. But countries or other organizations can also put in their own data and calculate these indicators with that, allowing countries and organizations to maintain sovereignty over this data instead of having to send it out to someone to calculate it and then receive results back. Bon in a Box is also working to implement pipelines to identify data gaps and prioritize sampling areas. And this will help organizations and countries to get the most out of the resources that they put towards these monitoring efforts.
But still stands the communication challenge. We believe that contributing code, with same as the open source philosophy, open source right now is thriving across the world, and it removes barriers. It removes duplication of effort barriers. It enhances the visibility of people's work. You can contribute, and it becomes the building blocks for the next scientist to build upon, or it can be linked to, as we did our reporting with this pipeline made by this person. We also want to set up a peer review process that's going to make this very rigorous scientifically. And the open source community removes some of the political barriers so that everybody can contribute to this greater effort instead of doing it on their side, on their own, or in small collaboration groups. That way, countries with resources can help the countries with less resources.
Bon in a Box also helps connect science to policy by creating analysis pipelines that are guided by the needs of the policymakers. They're user-friendly for non-specialists, so anyone can use them, and this transparency enables trust between decision makers and scientists.
Now we'll go on to the hands-on part of the discussion. Discussion of the presentation, sorry. So we'll show you a bit of how the tool works. On the left-hand side here, there are, imagine you're a contributor right now. It's not for the state, it's for the contributor, that part. And we'll go over this in much more detail on Friday at the GEO BON Pavilion for those who are interested. The date will be at the end of the presentation. But just a quick overview. There are boxes here that represent processing units. The boxes are dropped in this main canvas area. And this is where the pipeline is assembled. A workflow that we usually have many steps with manual operations in between. Here we're trying to automate it as much as possible, connecting the steps to one another in an automated way until the inputs from the left become valuable outputs for decision making here on the right. But this is a simple pipeline. We can here see a much more complex pipeline, which is a species distribution model pipeline. It's an essential biodiversity variable. And we can see a bit of the steps. So there's data acquisition, data cleaning a bit further to the right, acquisition of data layers, study extent, background points, and then we get to the model. And this is the point where we say, well, this is kind of a bit complicated. Should everybody, everywhere in the world, be doing this separately? Now we've put it in image, but that's what's actually happening when people do workflows. We believe that this should be contributed by those who really understand the species distribution models or any indicators of the GBIF, and be done once and incrementally updated or have a few variations of it. And then it's going to make it much more easier for the others to use it. Let's see a bit now how it can be used. So input form. The inputs, can you open the input form? It creates a form. So in order to customize the pipeline for your specific region or your specific species you're looking for, you fill this form. This form is made by all the inputs of the steps you saw just back there. Once this is filled, you run it, you wait a bit, and you get the detailed results. Again, this is for someone who's working on making the analysis. They'll be able to see all the logs, all the results of every step in a very transparent fashion. So we're far from the black box approach here. You could even click and go straight to the code if you want. So this is the detailed view. But to present this, we made a UI that's a bit more presentable for reporting to decision makers, reporting in presentations. Here, for example, model pipeline that ran, so we can see the species, the DOI of the GBIF download, whatever the contributor to the pipeline deemed important to show in a presentation will be there. So it goes all the way to the prediction and the variability of the prediction, or in other words, oh, well, yeah, Wi-Fi is a bit slow. Usually with the cloud-optimized GeoTIFFs, it's pretty fast. And if you want to know more about cloud-optimized GeoTIFFs, come on Friday.
So we think that Bon in a Box, this collaborative monitoring tool, is essential in forming this global biodiversity observation system, or GBIOS, which is this network of scientists that are all collaborating together towards monitoring efforts and towards meeting the targets of the global biodiversity framework. And this works by connecting people who are doing the on-the-ground efforts in countries with GEO BON experts. These people can both contribute pipelines that they've developed in-house and also benefit from pipelines that have been developed by other GEO BON experts or other countries that are doing similar things.
So now let's take a step back, look towards the future. We believe that Bon in a Box is the future of indicator reporting, that an open, collaborative, transparent platform with all the GBF indicators in there, and even more, is exactly what we need. But to get there, we'll need lots of collaborators, lots of collaboration between parties, between national agencies, between the 3,000 GeoBon members. This is just the beginning. For example, here, you can see this is what we have currently available in the platform. Some headlines, component complementary, essential biodiversity variables, all were brought there by wonderful contributors from Colombia, Switzerland, and Canada. And there are more on the way. And to show a bit of how this collaboration can happen, I'll now let the floor to Sean Hoban, who's going to talk to us a bit about how it worked for integrating this genetic diversity indicator into Bon in a Box. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Michel. Thank you, Jory. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be in front of you to speak. My name is Sean Hoban. I help lead the Genetic Composition Working Group of GEO BON, and I'm one of the collaborators that Jean-Michel was talking about, people working together as a really large group in the GEO BON network. So I'm presenting on behalf of Deborah Lee, who was not able to make it today, and I hope I do a good job for her. I'll be presenting a prototype of a Bon-in-the-Box pipeline for the genetic indicator. So this is headline indicator A4 on the effective population size, a way of tracking genetic diversity. Why are we talking about genetic diversity? It's one of the relatively neglected elements of biodiversity relative to species and ecosystems, but it's a vital component of biodiversity because it allows species and populations to change, to adapt to changing conditions like climate change, like extreme events, and to recover their populations. So genetic diversity is that variation within species. Some individuals are adapted to cold or warm or dry or wet conditions, and that variability helps them survive in different environments. And this is reflected in the GBIF. The GBIF Target 4 and Goal A commits to maintaining and restoring genetic diversity within and between populations to maintain adaptive potential. And there are numerous genetic indicators in the GBIF, and I'll talk about two of those today in the prototype pipeline for the Bon-in-a-Box tool, a complementary and a headline indicator. And these are also both based on the GeoBon essential biodiversity variables. So it's easiest to picture these indicators with a simple picture. So on your left, you see a set of populations, and you see genetic variation as different colors. When we lose a unique population, we potentially lose the local adaptations that population has. So a simple way of tracking genetic diversity change is tracking the loss of the populations that existed. And on this side, you see one population through time. Again, the colors are genetic variation. So you can see in small populations, you have less and less genetic diversity. So the other way we can track genetic diversity change is by looking at whether populations are too small. So that's simply the two indicators, maintaining populations and maintaining each of those populations at a given size. What is the effective population size? You don't have to know all the details of this, but it is important to note that the effective population size is kind of like the genetic behavior of the population. It's usually smaller than the count of the number of individuals, and that's because not every individual reproduces. They reproduce in different amounts and therefore pass on their genes differently to the next generation. So all you have to know is that the effective population size from a genetic standpoint is usually smaller than the census size, but if we know the census size, we can usually get to the genetic effective size. So a recent multinational effort in 9 countries did do a pilot evaluation of these indicators for 900 countries, and you can check that out here. It took a relatively small amount of effort, a few hours per species, to gather the data. But with Bon-in-a-Box, we are excited to develop a pipeline that's even faster, simpler, affordable, and feasible for everyone. So one way to do it is shown in this paper, but I'll be presenting the Bon-in-a-Box pipeline, which is another way we are trying to make it even simpler and faster. And the simpler, faster way to do it is maybe to use satellite imagery or space images. So you can see in this picture a forest in 1989 and in 2022. And you can see loss of forest, right? Well, you can imagine that loss of forest could result in loss of populations and thus loss of genetic diversity, or loss of forest could result in smaller populations and thus loss of genetic diversity. So what we're doing in this pipeline is taking those satellite images and translating them to these two genetic indicators. And this has been done by a huge team. I can't even name them all. It would take me the whole talk to name everybody who's been involved, but great work, both from the Bon in a Box team and the Genes from Space team, an International Space Station Institute-funded working group led by the University of Zurich. So here's how the pilot tool works. It has 3 steps. The first step is to define populations. Of course, if you want to track the loss of populations, you first have to define them. So that's step 1. In this example, we have 3 yellow populations. The next step is to look at habitat change over time. So you see the original forest cover is a little more extensive, and then at the second time point, there's less forest. So we've got defining populations and then defining the habitat over time. And then the third step is to put these together. And you can see this is the original time. All 3 of those populations had habitat. And at the second time point, we've lost the habitat for population 3. So that has resulted in a loss of the unique adaptations of that population. Population 1 got smaller because its habitat got smaller. So we lost some genetic diversity there. It got below the NE 500 threshold. And that results in an NE 500 indicator and a populations maintained indicator. So a little bit more about defining those populations. How do we do it? The user could provide polygons, so shapes around the populations. You could provide IUCN maps, or your own expert or local communities who know those populations can provide their knowledge and expertise to inform where those populations are. Or you could just provide occurrence points to the tool and populations will be defined for you. Or you can just put in the species name and the tool will fetch those occurrence points and then define populations for you. So there are different ways of entering this tool's pipeline. And then there are 2 different habitat change maps in the tool so far, the Global Forest Watch and the European Space Agency habitat classification. So this is green for forest, red for lost forest, and this is a series of different habitat layers like marshes, wetlands, forests, grassland, freshwater, etc. So let's look at a real example. This was the first species that was presented for the Bon in a Box pipeline. It's wild avocado, native to Mexico, and it's native to the cloud forest, an endangered and rapidly changing ecosystem that is being lost to land use change. The layer we're going to use for this is the Global Forest Watch. Here's a satellite image, and then the translation of that satellite image into green for forest, red for forest loss. And this is what the tool does. This is what the tool does first. This is a map of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 populations in the forest, and you see that some of the forest has turned red. And that results in a reduction of these population sizes. But what does that mean for the genetic effective population size? This is what the tool does that is new and a really important development, which is it translates that area into the genetic effective size. So you see the 5 populations. One of them got reduced quite a bit, but actually all of them are above the genetic effective size of 500. So from a standpoint of rapid loss of genetic diversity and adaptation, there have been some losses, but they haven't crossed that threshold. So actually the indicator value is 1 for the NE 500, and it's 1 for populations maintained, meaning this species is still relatively genetically healthy relative to other species we might be looking at. So let's look at one more forest species. This is an oak, also native to Mexico. It has a lot more populations. We'll go straight to the effective size. You see again some declines. Only, actually 2 of them. You see 2 are below the effective size of 500. And then we translate that to the NE 500 indicator. I think it's 2 out of about 21 or 22 populations. There are also a number of populations close to that threshold. So this tool can also help you identify populations that might soon be genetically threatened. So not only does it give you an indicator overall for the species, but it can direct management action to maybe help these populations that are at a low genetic effective size. So the advantages of this pipeline, which we're happy to keep developing and to have your suggestions, but the advantages right now, it's affordable, very fast, possible with limited or no prior data. You can do it frequently, so these satellites have really high density through time. So every year is what I showed you. That's much faster than we could do with DNA-based assessments, for example. And a very large capacity. You could do this for essentially a really large number of species. But there are limitations right now. The tool is not ready for like rapid deployment right now by parties, but we hope to get it to that point. So currently limitations are the ecosystem has to be visible from space, so it won't detect threats like poaching, for example. There are some assumptions, and you have to know a little bit about the species density. For example, how many individuals typically occur within a given habitat area. I think that in the future we could maybe provide some of that knowledge within the tool, like how many trees are typically within a certain kilometer for a common versus a rare tree species, or lizards or something like that, to help the user get that information. And so it's still a pilot tool right now, but it has a lot of potential. And it's been a really great experience being a part of contributing to Bon in a Box. So it's been exciting to contribute to this suite of tools across the different levels of biodiversity. The team of developers are awesome. So some of them are in the room, and they have been really enthusiastic and helpful and very rapidly responding to suggestions and improving this tool, like really rapidly. This tool was only envisioned like 6 months ago. So really amazing development, and thanks to the team for that. Open to suggestions and ideas. And it's been great to design something that ultimately we hope will be used by decision makers and included in things like your national reporting. And as Jean-Michel showed, it's interactive and you can have a kind of hands-on experience. So I'll finish now. If you're interested in this tool, you can click on this QR code and join the discussion online and find more about the people who created it and get in touch with us. If you're interested in the genetic diversity indicators, we have a number of events that are happening throughout the week. You can find us also at a booth. Just look for the chameleon. Or you can click on this QR code if you want to know more about those genetic diversity indicators. So thank you. Again, it's been a really great experience working on the Bon in a Box pipeline for the genetic diversity indicators.
Thank you very much, Sean. I want to emphasize the fact that the Genes from Space team were extremely well prepared. This has been going very swiftly. It's been until we have been speaking about it for a few months, but the hands-on work started in July, and we have a prototype that people can actually try testing. And I hope it really brings some hope that this indicator framework can be calculated with tools like that. And there's another contributor, but also a user of Bon in a Box, both at the same time, Instituto Alexander von Humboldt. I can say they're one of the pillars of Bon in a Box. They have been there since the beginning. So please welcome Lina Maria for this presentation.
Thank you. Where is it? Here? Hello, everybody. Again, I'm speaking on behalf of a rather big team of people that are or have been at Instituto Humboldt, and also a colleague from Cornell Lab of Ornithology. yeah, if the people here want to raise their hand on the team, but I don't know. Elena's there, Victor is there, and the other people are in Bogota or in Canada. Anyway, so like Jean Michel said, we were both have been both developer and users of Bon in a Box. We contributed in three different tools that are in the box of tools. The first one was a database on biodiversity monitoring projects that I'm going to show you a little bit later more. The second one was building pipelines for essential biodiversity variable calculation. And the third one was building pipelines for indicator calculation. So I'm not going to go into details about how the specific pipelines work. I'm just going to show them a list, but then I'm going to tell you, other than building them, how we've been using them on our work to enhance our progress towards biodiversity monitoring. So the first one is the Bon in a Box monitoring projects portal. This is what you'll see once you join it. And the idea was there's a lot of people doing biodiversity monitoring in our country and around the world, but it's very hard sometimes for people to get connected with each other. We especially had like a really long database of projects, including community initiatives. And a lot of these people don't have a website or don't have like a scientific paper that is written in English that will give them visibility, but they do have the knowledge about the species and the ecosystems that they've been monitoring. So what we did is took all of our databases from surveys we've been doing in Colombia about monitoring since 2015 maybe, and put them in Bon in a Box. So now these people have like a website where people can see the organization, the scale, the biological groups, who's the team. They can link back to their own website if they do have it, to different papers. And we also created a way to evaluate the strength of the monitoring component in each of the projects, because there's a lot of things that are called monitoring, and it can be very different things. So we talked about repeated sampling being one of the characteristics that we would want in monitoring, duration, frequency, how standardized the method was, and how sustainable the project is. So we can give people that are looking to connect with other projects an idea of opportunities for strengthening what is already there, instead of everybody starting from scratch as if nothing has been done before. And the idea is that this part of the Bon in a Box is already open and ready for everybody to put in their projects. Then in terms of essential biodiversity variables, and going along with what Jory was saying, a lot of the time we don't have data, but a lot of the time we do have data and we don't know what to do with it. And we thought about the types of data that we have better representation for in Colombia in terms of biodiversity. One of them is bird data from eBird records, and the other one is data from camera trapping. So the three pipelines that we designed were for calculating EBVs with occurrence area, and then a density proxy. So we worked with our colleagues at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology to develop occupancy area, which is an EBV that works at a very localized and very related to management level, but also density proxy that will show you like a wider region. This is a very data hungry process, but it's like the closest thing we have to being calculating something that is related to abundance at the population level right now for birds in Colombia. So we're really excited about getting that set up. Oh, and these little batteries show you how close we are to having the pipeline. So this is why I'm not going into the details. We're not 100% ready, but we will be ready soon. And then in terms of the indicators, we are working on a lot of pipelines with different types of progress. What is important is that we chose indicators that were important for us for different reasons. So obviously we included some of the headline indicators for the CBD because we have to report them and it's easier for us to have a pipeline to do it. but we also included indicators that are national priorities or things that we already had in our decision support system, which is called Biotablero. And having the pipelines really help us get everything organized so that we can keep calculating the indicator based on the same data, the same method over time, which is important because obviously we want to keep updating this. This cannot just be like we calculated it once and never again. So this is one of our examples, and you'll see around the room there's some little leaflets on that. And it's constructing the pipeline to compute the red list index because it's a headline indicator of the CBD. We already know we're going to keep calculating it. And we recently used it in a project that we have with WCMC to calculate a multidimensional biodiversity index. So it was very easy for us to, for example, having the pipeline say, oh, we're not going to calculate it for all the species, we're just going to use the endemics. Or like in this example, we're just going to use the crocodiles because we want to focus on the crocodiles, or we just want to do one region. Because what happens is there's some very easy steps. So you choose your biological group, whatever you want. Then you choose your geographical level. We did it at the national level, but if you have information at different scales, you could calculate it at different scales very easily. It connects with the IUCN database, so it's very easy to get the results. And again, because it's something that we have to keep doing year after year, but also we want to be very transparent about how we are calculating. Bon in a box is really easy to have this pipeline. And so we see these opportunities for groups that want to work with Bon in a box, especially those that want to help develop the pipelines. Working in the project definitely helped us organize and standardize our workflows, and also realize how important the documentation is between these workflows. Because even in our own office, every time somebody left, we would be left with questions about how they used to do this thing that now another person has to do. If you take that to the global level, it's even more important. It also helped us increase our collaborative work both within our team and with our external partners. So for example, the work with Cornell is something we've been trying to do for a while, and now we are going to see the products of it. Also, the pipeline follows the whole data cycle, from getting the biological data, getting the geographical data. And we used to have like different processes, different scripts for different steps. So it's a way of bringing all these pieces we had together into like a whole process that may change. Because it's open science, it works a lot for us because we do have like an open science mentality and workway at Humboldt. And it helped us centralize and integrate scripts from different softwares to minimize reprocessing. So while we were doing this, we would notice, oh, this person is doing this specific step of, I don't know, cutting a geographical layer in this way, and the other person does it in the other way, and the other person in the other way. We could just look for the best way and then use that same step in different pipelines to get the same results. And it's very easy to adapt it to different projects once you have it built. As for challenges, we still think that in its current state, the platform still has a very steep learning curve. So if people want to develop their own pipelines, they need to make sure that the team has very tech savvy people, but also people that understand the scientific work behind the pipelines. It's not yet ready for like an average user of in technological terms, because we were both users and contributors at the same time, because the platform's still under development. That created some challenges. So definitely this is something that if an organization or a country is gonna devote themselves to build a pipeline, it helps to have a very strong team that can dedicate a lot of their time to this. Because once it's ready, it's gonna save a lot of time, but it does require a lot of work in the beginning. Also, before the platform gets super big, and because it's a collaborative framework, we still need to work on the roles, the rules, the documentation for collaboration. if it helped us organize even work within our team, that we're all at the same city, we all know each other, and sometimes realize we were doing things slightly different. Imagine having collaborators from the whole world. So it's important that before we go big, this is clear. And things like the project portal really need more diffusion. So if you guys want to help us with that, that would be great, because developing tools is only worth it if people are actually going to use them. So that's some of the challenges we have. And then our invitation, and you will see this around the room too, for countries and organizations that want to use this, is that using Bon in a Box will help you achieve these things. Have standardized methods, which is really important for indicator reporting. Have a collaborative environment, workflows that you can customize to your needs. So both for the CVD, but for any other things that you need to use the workflows. And it allows you integrating resources. We use global data, we use local data, we use data that is public, data that is not public, and it has helped organize all these different data sources. And at last, I'm just gonna do some propaganda. We have La Casa Humboldt, close to the green area in Cali. If you guys have time when you're not here, there's a whole lot of organizations and events and talks centered about biodiversity in Colombia. So if it's your first time in Colombia, this is a really cool place to learn about Colombian biodiversity. So look it up, and that's it.
Thank you very much, Lina. The next presentation will be in French, so if you had the QR code and you need translation that you scanned earlier, otherwise there are some QR codes on the table if you need them. I'm happy that tu peux commencer à t'installer. I'm happy that Lina gave this description about the project portal. So if there are parties right now in the room that know in their ministry they have monitoring projects in spreadsheets spread between 5 or 6 different people, it could be a good idea to centralize them, and we can offer some help with that. Any GeoBon member can fill the form to add a project, and if you need to do a mass import of projects, we can help with that too, to give visibility to that. Are you ready? You have the remote to accept. Oops. Il était pas branché. J'invite maintenant Aboubakar Samour.
I'm inviting Abubakar Samara from the Republic of Guinea. It's important to have collaborators, and it's also important to have people who will benefit from this project. So I am very excited that Guinea will be our very first partner when it comes to implementing Bon in a Box in a country. Of course, it works always better before the presentation when it comes to connecting to the Wi-Fi than during the presentation. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Lieutenant Colonel Abubakar Samoura for the Guinea Republic. I am the focal point for the CBD for the country, for the Republic of Guinea. I am a partner for the NGO IPEA Belly, a Canadian-based project who works with protected areas in a particular park in Amofamine and in Jabon also. This morning, this is my duty to present you with what we've done in Guinea in order to meet the GBIF objectives and the targets, which is to cover 30% of the national cover area with protected areas. The Republic of Guinea, after the COP15, wanted to do something important, and we started a reform program with a network of protected areas, which was initially built around 53 protected areas. That particular network, based around 53 protected areas, presents important natural resources, and those natural resources today are subject to and exposed to a lot of pressure and threats. We have poaching, as you can see, the opening of new roads and new infrastructures being built across the area. We have the wood cut, the cut being the timber cut, and the deforestation in different forms, and the farming activity. This network, this natural capital that we have, can help, it can be the basis of the country, the national development if managed correctly. Here we are. So in order to lead this process, it's important that Guinea clarifies and qualifies the status of its network. It's a natural capital that we have, as you can see here. It's a capital that we have which hasn't been necessarily highlighted strongly enough, valued enough. And as you know, if it's not done properly, it can generate a lot of income when it comes to tourist activities. This reshaping of the network is aiming to protect the Guinea, and we based it on the different networks that we have with the 53 protected areas. We strengthened the status for the previous system, which was there, and we qualified the borders and the different zoning areas, zoning system. And secondly, we suggested a new system of different labels: national park, natural reserve, community-based forest, forest for afforesting, and sustainable wood. And as you know, in most countries, each time we reforest, we do it with a defined target in order to protect it, or we can do it with the aim to use the wood generated for energy and heating wood by using the network and the protected areas that we had previously. So this protection is based on strengthening the network that we have, strengthening the protection of the water resources at national and regional level. We are called as the water tower. We have over 1,500 streams starting from Guinea, and Niger River goes across 9 countries across West Africa. So the implementation of those protected areas will contribute to strengthen the protection for the resources in water. It's very important for biodiversity and the ecosystem, the EBV, and this is where we that's where the partnership with GEO BON is really relevant. We have a network in place, but it's not quite viable. As I remember, the latest plan that we had on the topic was dates from back 1987. So so setting a partnership with GEO BON will help us to implement an efficient monitoring system and allow us to evaluate it properly. Enhancing how we plan, how we use the land, and we work with mines and agricultural sector. We are very rich in such resources. 20% of the territory is covered by mines. Therefore, there is an overlap between the licenses for mining and the protected areas, which often leads to conflicts between the different ministries, in particular the Ministry of Mining and the Ministry of Environment, which is responsible for the biodiversity protection. So I believe that this partnership that we are putting in place with GEO BON will enable us not only to have an idea of the breadth of biodiversity that we have across our protected areas, but we will also be able to use those indicators in order to explain to other ministries and say this is a very rich area. You shouldn't you shouldn't have any mining sites on this area. Concrete answers to international commitments. The CDB, we committed to covering 30% of the territory with protected areas. The climate change convention and the contribution to reducing the GHG and the Red Plus project. And this translates into a network that will be based on the current national parks, and we will add to that other small areas, protected areas, so that this diversity is properly and is guaranteed, protected. Ladies and gentlemen, this dashboard highlights the true efforts deployed by Guinea since COP15 in Kunming and Montreal. The former network counted 53 protected areas with 15% of the cover of the national territory covered. By those, some of them do exist on paper, but when you go on site, those areas are no longer here. So with the activities that we initiated, we were able to refresh, to actualize, update the different boundaries, and then we went from 10% to 22% of the coverage with the new network. And this is before 2030. And beside that, we are creating new protected areas, and once they are added to the network, that should help us to improve the area and the percentage of the area covered. Here you are, you can see a table of the previous network. This is a new network that we are working on. The percentage of areas covered is clearly increasing. Well, this new network, we try to assess it, how it's contributing to Red Plus, to which extent it contributes to Red Plus. It will contribute to the storage. The sequestration level of carbon will increase to over 50%. And I believe that thanks to the partnership that we want to implement and set up with GEO BON, we should have more accuracy on those calculations. And this should enable us to value the carbon potential which is being generated across thanks to those protected areas. So for this process to be efficient, we drew a roadmap that we are implementing at the moment. And this is the reason why I wanted to be here for this side event, in order to show you, to highlight what will be the proportion, the contribution from GEO BON in helping us setting up the network. And this is a project which is done with the World Bank, but just the World Bank cannot do by themselves everything. So we need other partners who can also contribute so that it can be very and truly diversified. Well, good. So we have the institutional setup. There are a certain number of legislations that we have introduced in order to strengthen the network, in order to fund those protected areas, the implementation of standardized administrative process for the management. And we worked with different entities who are responsible for the network management, the strengthening of the relationships with the institutions, with different antennas on the ground, on the field, the partnership in order to, for the training aspect to develop competencies. This is a very important step for us. And this is important that I highlight that the fact that we are looking for partners will be based not only on strengthening the local staff in Guinea, but also to introducing a monitoring system in place for biodiversity, as well as a transfer of knowledge by the end of the project. We want that once the project is over, we want Guinea to be able to use BON in a box in order to communicate on a regular basis with the CBDE and shared CDB, and share all the reports that we need to report to them, to operationalize the management of the protected areas in order to strengthen the capacities, develop the capacities, operationalize the activities in protected areas, the various documents which have to be used and to document the activities, the strategy for the and BESAPs, and that we are updating at the moment. And in doing so, we do want GEO BON to help us with those NBSAP for the monitoring and follow-up, because we do not have experts on the topic. So I do believe we are expecting a lot from the assistance from GEO BON in doing so. The implementation of and the creation of the different bodies to help with governance of those protected areas. It's not done with one body. This is done with the support from the community. So this is an example of such an area, such a protected area. So we consult with them in order to ensure that we are heading in the right direction.
Environmental is
So the strategy in order to extend the network, and we are currently looking at this network. We cannot go through the reservation of a national park without looking at the impact on biodiversity. So we have started studies, and I think that the data for the new database we're going to set up will definitely help us to complete the studies which are currently being carried out on these protected areas. Engagement when it comes to raising awareness, so working with local communities. And the end project of this is to write a decree which will take into consideration the 18 national parks, which will be part of the network of protected areas, which will then be transferred to WDPA, because when you look at WDPA, you have the old network, and sometimes the data is not correct. With this new project, we will be able to have a clear network with all the details and with the good data, which is updated. Integrated local development through the creation of green jobs. we are currently helping communities, and we have a Canadian project which supports the Ghanaian office on different work. So we are supporting women, groups of women in farming activities and innovative agriculture. Coordination of financing of technical partners and financial partners, the detailed evaluation of needs, the creation of a fund for partners. We are currently setting up a fund for the conservation of biodiversity, and this trust fund, will be we will have contributions from technical partners and financial partners, and also carbon credits. Ladies and gentlemen, I reached the end of my presentation. It was quicker than I envisaged because we don't have much time. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, I am here. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur Samora.
Thank you, Mr. Samura.
Gonzalez. I am the other co-chair of GEO BON. I have the pleasure of doing that task with Maria Cecilia Londoño. What I want to do now is just take 10, 15 minutes with you all, open the floor to questions. We've seen, I think the most potent dimension of Bon in a Box is collaboration. We've seen collaboration from the science community contributing indicators and pipelines that are relevant to the GBIF, from headlines to component and complementary. We've seen how to work with a country who obviously has a lot of capacity, a lot of data, and a means to rapidly mobilize Bon in a Box in their context. And then we've seen a need from a country that is starting from a long way, and a long way back in terms of being able to orchestrate and coordinate the activities of gathering data into a single repository and be able to use that to calculate the indicators. A fourth dimension that we haven't touched upon today is how it permits collaboration among countries in a vision stepping towards an international cooperation in a completely transformative way. The seeds of that already happened between Quebec and Colombia, in our ability to share pipelines, to share code, to think about how to solve challenges in establishing the platform. But it goes way beyond that. It goes way beyond in terms of our ability to translate what the monitoring framework means, getting the words off the page and into action. And so the vision ultimately is to connect multiple countries at different stages of development and progress collectively under the vision that GEO BON brings, but under a platform that's in very concrete terms, makes that possible. So I want to just stop there for a second and take some questions. And then at the end, I'll just close on the next steps of how we're going to work with the Secretary of the CBD so that Bon in a Box can help the reporting process for parties. So if I see a question here, and then there. Wow, we have 3, 4, 5. Oh, you do that. You do that. We're able to take questions in 3 languages, Spanish, French, and English. So feel free to express them in one of those languages.
I think it was from, what is your name?
Sean.
Sean's presentation, but then I started to think through the other ones. How do you incorporate disturbance into the EBV variables, or to look at genetic diversity? Because it seems to me that many species are adapted to disturbance, and it's something extremely important to take into consideration. And in some instances, natural disturbances have been suppressed. For example, flooding. Protections against flooding is a way to control a disturbance to which many species are adapted to. So how do you incorporate disturbance into all the amazing things that you have shown here?
Sure, I can speak from the genetic part, and then others, if they want to answer. Thank you so much. So this is, I think, the kind of question and collaboration we need to improve the tools, and that we welcome. So first, I would say that the tool I demonstrated is very much in the pilot phase, and we would really appreciate exactly this type of suggestion so that it can be improved. I know what you mean. I'm a forest biologist by training, so I know that some trees are dependent. A tree I work on is very dependent on, disturbance of flooding, to open up habitat for it. So specifically with the Bon-in-a-Box tool, one can identify the type of habitat that the species prefers. It may not work for all species. So there may be some species for which you can't define fine scale enough the appropriate habitat or the type of dynamics of that habitat. And so in the guidance for these tools, it will be very important for us to say there are, certain species that it's not going to work for. I think for most of these tools, there will be some exceptions, and it's important to highlight those so that the tool is not used in for those kinds of species. So I think that's all I can say. It's a very important point, and I hope we can incorporate it. Thank you.
Go for it.
Yep. Hello. Andreas Brink, European Commission. I have a question which is a bit more general about Eurobon and GEO BON and the Bon-in-a-Box. We have national and regional bonds as well. In Europe, we have a Europa bond, which we support very much. And within this, we are now proposing also the so-called EBOC, the European Biodiversity Observation Coordination Center, very long name, which is partly doing something similar. So how do we connect this? And eventually other regional or national bonds are doing something similar. And somehow at the top, it should be able then to link and connect to this. What is the idea there? Thank you.
That is exactly the idea. That is the vision. So I mean, for the EBOC case, we work closely with the principal players in the implementation, both of Europa Bond before that, of course, and now in the EBOC instance. The power of GeoBon is that it's an open network distributed in 149 countries, and that we have an international bonds. We have regional bonds, AP bond, Europa bond, and we have the national bonds. So the idea is that if there's a collective contribution to Bon-in-a-Box, then what we can do via the Secretariat is support the process of implementing Bon-in-a-Box in each of those locations. Now that requires that a GeoBon member or an institute, one of the 1,800 institutes that are members of GeoBon, pick up and work with capacity building and training. So we haven't mentioned the kind of the three models for how Bon-in-a-Box could work. So Bon-in-a-Box could work if you have capacity, you can obtain your own instance of Bon-in-a-Box and run it locally. There are relatively few examples of being able to do that, but they exist. Columbia is one of them through the Humboldt Institute. The second is that we would support you in establishing and setting up Bon-in-a-Box, but then some subsequent training would allow you to run some various pipelines to establish that independence. And the third is that GeoBon would do everything from end to end, and they would establish the instance and run all that for you. So what we anticipate is across countries, different levels of readiness and different levels of sort of maturity in the development of the monitoring, national monitoring framework. And that's what we're trying to test out in our partnership with Guinea, with Colombia, and with other countries. So we're in this critical stage now of mobilizing Bon-in-a-Box and finding the resources to do that. You want to add to that?
Yes, thanks, Andy. I just want to add that there needs to be, I think, a mentality change of not stopping at the local context, let's say, at the publication of a paper, or stopping at the internal use of an indicator, but to actually just get the little work necessary to make this generic and runnable elsewhere in the world. And I think that component is crucial for these bonds to have, well, they have the indicator operating. They're 80% done, or maybe 90% done in making this usable by the next door. So I think there needs to be just a little mentality change to go just a bit further.
Next question.
That was a great presentation, a very promising platform. I have two questions, actually. One is, I'm the chief scientist of New Atlantis Labs. We are focused on sustainable finance mechanisms and ocean biodiversity assessment. And my question is, do you actually support assessment of biodiversity in a highly dynamic environment such as the oceans, and specifically in the context of the unseen majority, which are the microbiomes? And this requires a lot of data-hungry pipelines, like bioinformatic pipelines that can provide insights into microbiomes using metagenomics and metatranscriptomics datasets. And the other question is, in the light of agents or large language models, how are you coping with continuous integration in order to stay relevant? Because these guys are gonna transform pretty much everything. And as a scientist, we definitely have to leverage on all these tools because they can actually improve biodiversity monitoring schemes, metrics, ecological models, and all that stuff.
That was three complicated questions in one there. The first question was around working with the oceans. So we have Marine Bon, working closely with Marine Bon and with the Ocean Biodiversity Information System, so that under the hood, we have the same information sharing system that's in our block one, I believe it is. That's already been integrated through the collaboration with Marine Bon and Omics Bon, which is part of GeoBon's network. Second question was, hold on a second. Metagenomics, yes, we are not going to, this is not a closed community. The idea if we're doing deep metagenomics, sequencing bacteria plankton in highly dynamic systems, and there are pipelines for that, this is an open platform for those pipelines. There's no closure in terms of the dimension of biodiversity. Yeah, absolutely. On AI, good question. So the first implementation that we want to do for AI in this case is regenerative assistive LLM. So where you have a corpus of information, you have PDFs, you have documents from GeoBon experts, and they're very difficult to understand and retrieve. So with this RAG LLM, the idea is to make that searchable and obtainable within Bon in a Box. So if you're searching for an EBV, you want to know if there's a model for certain EBV, that would pull out that. Exactly. Here. Oh, you have it. Good.
Hello, my name is David. I'm a molecular ecologist at the Harbor Branch Institute. And I had a similar question about how you kind of ground truth these predictive models. Do you guys use molecular data to kind of reassess if these predictions are accurate or correct?
A great question, thank you. And again, I really appreciate the engagement on this tool. Not yet, is the short answer. As Jean-Michel said, we've developed this pipeline for the genetic diversity indicator quite quickly, and we've shown it at a very pilot phase so that we can get these kinds of input and questions. Myself and my colleagues are working with this and similar things to basically, as you say, ground truth. That work is, I would say, still in progress, and I don't have an answer fully to your question, but it's definitely in the plan, and we know it's necessary. And a useful part is to look at genetic data alongside these indicator pipelines, and that can also help make a place for including the genetic data, so when it's available. And that's an important thing that we also want to do, is to make a way to input maybe genetic data if you have it. So that's another thing that would be great to do.
One last question.
Hey, awesome. I have the
Lucky.
mic. First, thank you for bringing up the microbiome. I'm a microbial biogeochemist from University of Regina, Canada, and it's very important. The moment you talk about any ecosystem, you cannot not talk about microbes. They are the main regulators. But my main question is for Lena. You talk about the open science and how some of your data might be open and some of them not. How people can access them or access non-open data in your platform? Or can they?
Yeah. So again, this is thinking about countries being user or organizations that want to calculate their own EBV or their own indicators. So in our case, we mainly use open data, but if a country or organization wants to calculate an indicator and then make the indicator public but not the data public, they could choose to do it, because Bone in a Box does not store data. So basically, we use different connections and the stack catalog for spatial data and all that. but the pipelines right now, it's like the user inputs whatever they want, and then they are in charge of storing the outputs and doing whatever they want with them. So in this sense, it's just the workflow that is going to be in Bon in a Box, and so that would be up to the user. We have another example with our species distribution models platform, which is Biomodelos, where we use a lot of public data, but sometimes experts put their own data, but they don't want to publish it yet. But we would publish the model based on the data, but not the data if the owners of the data don't want to.
But in the three models that Andy was describing earlier, the first model is you're running the thing on your own computer, so the data can stay there, everything can stay there, so there's no problem of closed data in this case. You're just running it yourself.
We have to wrap up. I'm thrilled that so many people came. Just a nod to the next step. So we're working to connect this platform to the reporting tool of the Secretariat of the CBD to facilitate countries that if they want to run indicator A4, for example, a headline indicator, and that's a priority in their national biodiversity strategy and action plan, we want to make that easy. So we want a credible, open platform that does that. So working with the Secretariat's team on that, on who's developing the reporting tool, that's our next development. We have a number of opportunities to come and find out more about what we're doing, get into the code, get into the deep, just sort of familiarize yourself with what we're offering. You can see we have a Bon in a Box help desk. We have a technical overview on Friday at 11:45. And we have another event on the 23rd on Wednesday at 6:30. Come join us for that. Come and get to know the team and familiarize yourself with what Bon in a Box can do. And I just want to close by thanking the funders of this. This was a public-private partnership. We received a gift from Microsoft to do this. They had no skin in the game. They might wanted more AI in it, but they didn't get more AI because we want more humans in the loop and less machines in the loop. And I have to thank the university, Quebec Center for Biodiversity Science, the Humboldt Institute, and the Librera Research Chair. And with that, I'd like to thank all of our and Cardiff University for the live translation. Thank you so much, Cardiff. We wouldn't have been able to do that without you. So one last round of applause for our amazing speakers. Thank you.